I hadn't planned to come home for spring break. College had been draining, sure, but not enough to make me want to return to the quiet, echoing halls of my childhood home. Still, when my mom called saying Jesse was bringing a friend to stay for the week, something in me hesitated, curious, maybe, or just lonely enough to say yes. Jesse had always been the kind of older brother people gravitated toward. Loud, confident, the kind of guy who always had a plan and usually a crowd to go with it. I, on the other hand, was quieter. I liked sketching alone in my dorm room, walking with headphones in, watching people but rarely joining in. Jesse and I got along well enough, but we lived in different orbits. When I got home, the house smelled like old furniture and cinnamon candles. My mom was out with friends. I dropped my bag by the stairs and heard voices from the kitchen. Laughter, deep and familiar. Jesse walked in first, shirt tossed over his shoulder, hair damp from a recent shower. Behind him, someone followed. Taller than I remembered, shoulders broader, jawline sharper. It took me a second to recognize him. Noah, you remember Kade, right? Jesse said. He's staying with us for a few days. Kade. I blinked. I did remember him, sort of. He used to come by in high school, lanky and always wearing headphones, tagging behind Jesse like a shadow. But this wasn't that boy. This Kade carried himself differently, like he'd grown into his frame and learned how to fill a room. Hey, Kade said with a slow smile. Been a while. Yeah, I replied, trying not to stare. Good to see you. We made small talk for a few minutes. Classes, the weather, Jesse's attempt at cooking, which apparently had gone terribly wrong. I laughed politely, but my mind kept drifting. Kade had a way of looking at people that felt like he was listening with his eyes. It made my skin prickle. I headed upstairs to unpack. My room hadn't changed much. Same posters on the walls, same scratchy bedspread. I slipped out of my hoodie, then tugged off my shirt, humming under my breath as I reached for fresh clothes. The door creaked. I turned, shirt half off, startled. Kade stood there, hand on the knob, frozen like he hadn't expected anyone inside. Oh, sorry, he said, eyes flicking from my bare chest to the floor. But he didn't move. Not right away. It's fine, I mumbled, grabbing the shirt and pulling it on. I felt the flush rise up my neck, hot and immediate. He finally looked away. I thought this was the bathroom. Jesse said it was across from his room. It is, I said, nodding toward the next door. This is mine. He lingered another second, then smiled, apologetic maybe, or amused. Guess I should knock next time. And then he was gone. I stood there, shirt sticking to my back, heart tapping against my ribs. It had been less than 10 seconds, maybe less than 5. But the way he looked at me, calm, unhurried, like it didn't matter that I was shirtless or that he'd walked in without warning. Something about it rattled me. I tried to shake it off. Maybe he hadn't meant anything. Maybe he was just surprised. But the more I replayed it, the more unsettled I felt. There was no awkward apology, no sheepish laugh. Just that moment of stillness, his gaze steady, unreadable. At dinner, I barely spoke. Jesse and Kade joked about old classmates and gym pranks, their voices loud and effortless. I nodded where appropriate, pushed rice around my plate, and avoided Kade's eyes. But at one point, I felt it, his gaze brushing over me. Not long, not obvious, just enough to make me feel like the room had shifted slightly, like I'd stepped into something unspoken. That night, I lay in bed listening to the hum of the ceiling fan, the muffled laughter from the next room, the way the walls held onto every sound. I told myself I was imagining things, that a look was just a look, that Kade probably hadn't meant anything by it. But part of me wasn't sure, and part of me didn't want it to be nothing. The next few days blurred into something half real, like scenes from a dream you're not sure you should be having. Jesse and Kade filled the house with noise and movement, video games in the living room, impromptu wrestling matches in the hallway, takeout containers scattered across the kitchen counter. I hovered at the edges, pretending to be absorbed in a book or my sketch pad, but really I was watching Kade. It wasn't just the way he moved, though that was part of it. Graceful in that effortless, athletic way, his sleeves rolled just high enough to show a faded scar on his forearm. It was the way he looked at me sometimes, like I wasn't just Jesse's little brother anymore. like I was something he was still trying to figure out. One night, I was in the kitchen pouring water when I sensed him behind me. I didn't hear him come in. He had that quiet kind of presence, like a shadow, slipping through a doorway. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. I turned. "You either?" He shrugged, opening the fridge, though he didn't seem to be looking for anything in particular. "The house is quieter than I remember." "Feels weird." I nodded. "It always feels weird when Jesse's not yelling." Kade laughed, low and genuine, and leaned against the counter. His eyes flicked to the sketch pad I'd left open nearby, an unfinished drawing of a figure, bent at the waist, hands stretched toward an unseen sky. "You drew that?" he asked, stepping closer. "Yeah," I said, suddenly self-conscious. "It's not done." "It's good," he said, almost too quickly. "Really good. I didn't know you did this kind of stuff." "I don't usually show people." "Why not?" I hesitated. "Most people don't get it." He looked at me for a long moment, then said, "I think I get it." Something shifted between us then. Not loud or dramatic, just a quiet, mutual awareness. I felt it in the space between our bodies, how he didn't back away when he stepped closer to look at the drawing. I could feel the warmth coming off him, the faint scent of his cologne, something woodsy, faintly sweet. "You ever draw people you know?" he asked, voice lower now. "Sometimes. Have you ever drawn me?" The question caught me off guard. I looked up and saw that his expression wasn't teasing. He was serious, and something in his eyes, curiosity, maybe a challenge, held me there. "No," I said slowly. "Not yet." Kade's lips curved, almost a smirk but not quite. "Maybe one day." He lingered another second before pushing off the counter. "Night, Noah. Night." But I didn't move for a long time after he left. My fingers were still wrapped around the glass, now half warm. I stared at the door he had passed through, thinking of how close he had stood, of the way he'd said my name, like it meant something more. The next evening, the rain came in sheets. Jesse had gone out with some old friends, leaving the house oddly hushed. I was curled on the couch with a blanket and a documentary, playing half-muted when I heard the stairs creak. Kate stepped into the room, wearing a hoodie and socks, hair slightly damp from a recent shower. He looked at me for a second, like he wasn't sure if he should speak. Then he walked over and sank onto the other end of the couch. "Is this okay?" he asked. I nodded. "Sure." We sat in silence for a bit, the flicker of the screen casting shadows on his face. Then he leaned his head back, eyes on the ceiling. "Sometimes I think about what life would have been like if I wasn't always following Jesse," he said suddenly. I turned to him. "What do you mean?" He let out a slow breath. "He's always been the one with a loud laugh, the confidence. I was just there, his sidekick." "You're not just a sidekick," I said, surprised at how quickly the words came. "Not to me." He looked at me then, really looked. The space between us shrank without either of us moving. His hand rested on the cushion, inches from mine. "You ever feel like no one sees you?" he asked. "All the time," I whispered. He reached out, gently brushing his fingers against the back of my hand. My heart stuttered. "I see you, Noah." It was a simple sentence. Quiet, but it felt like everything cracked open inside me. Before I could speak, before I could make sense of what I wanted to say, he leaned in, but just as his lips barely brushed mine, we heard footsteps overhead. Jesse's door opened with a groan, followed by the creak of the bathroom door. We froze. Kade pulled back, his eyes flickering to the ceiling, then back to me. "I should go." I nodded, throat tight. He stood, hesitated like he wanted to say something else, then walked out. I sat alone, the sound of the rain rising again. My hand still tingled from where he had touched it. My chest ached with the weight of something I couldn't name yet. But I knew one thing. This wasn't nothing. Jesse left early the next morning for a weekend trip with some of his old teammates. I watched his car pull out of the driveway, his music thumping through the glass. The silence that followed felt unfamiliar, like the house had exhaled all at once. Kate was still upstairs when I wandered into the kitchen. I poured coffee, trying to keep my hand steady, unsure if last night had been real or a dream. The memory of his voice, his fingers grazing mine, the almost kiss, it looped over and over like a song I couldn't get out of my head. I didn't see him until late afternoon. He came down barefoot, wearing a black t-shirt and sweatpants, rubbing his eyes like he'd just woken up. "Hey," he said, pausing in the doorway. "Hey." He leaned against the counter, arms crossed. His gaze found mine and held it. No smile this time, just something still and searching. "Can we talk?" I nodded, setting my cup down. "Yeah, of course." He led the way upstairs, not to Jesse's room, but to mine. He sat on the edge of my bed like he belonged there, like it was the most natural thing in the world. I stayed by the door for a moment, unsure, heart beating against my ribs like a warning. "I didn't plan any of this," he said quietly. "You should know that." "I didn't either," I said, voice smaller than I meant it to be. He looked up, his eyes softer now. "I don't know what this is, Noah, but I haven't been able to stop thinking about you." I stepped closer, slow and unsure. "Then what are we doing?" He reached out, fingers brushing mine again, gentle as if asking permission. "Can I kiss you?" I didn't answer. I just let him. The kiss was quiet. No fireworks, no movie soundtrack, just the subtle press of lips and the feeling of something unspoken breaking open between us. It wasn't urgent. It wasn't rushed. It felt like breathing for the first time. When we pulled away, I could see the question lingering in his eyes. I nodded before he could ask. And just like that, the days blurred into a pattern that felt both fragile and intoxicating. He'd knock on my door after midnight, soft and rhythmic, like a secret only we shared. We'd sit on the floor, backs against the bed, knees brushing, voices low. He'd tell me about his dreams, dropping out of business school, moving to the mountains, disappearing for a while. I'd tell him about the way I always felt invisible, even in rooms full of people. Some nights, he'd kiss me and leave. Other nights, he'd stay, and we'd fall asleep inches apart, careful not to cross any invisible line we hadn't named yet. I started sketching him without meaning to. Just outlines at first, his jaw, the curve of his wrist, the way his brows pinched when he was deep in thought. I kept the pages hidden in a folder under my bed. He never asked, but I think he knew. One night, he said, "I don't want Jesse to find out." I froze. "Why?" He exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. "Because he wouldn't get it. He'd think I was messing with you. Or worse." I looked at him, heart sinking. "Are you?" He shook his head. No, Noah. This isn't a game." But the way he said it, quiet, hesitant, it left a thread of doubt in my chest. We kept going anyway. When Jesse called one night to say he was staying an extra day, Kade grinned and grabbed my hand like we were escaping something. We spent the whole evening in my room, the door locked, his head resting in my lap while I read aloud from a book he didn't care about. He traced invisible shapes on my palm as I spoke, like he was memorizing me in silence. "I wish this didn't have to be a secret," I whispered. "I know," he said, "but secrets aren't always bad." I didn't answer. My throat felt tight. When he fell asleep that night, I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling. The silence felt heavier than before, like something was building in the space we kept trying to ignore. The next morning, I found him downstairs on the phone, pacing the kitchen floor. He didn't hear me come in. "I know, man. I know. I'm not doing anything stupid." "Relax," he said, laughing softly. I stepped back before he could see me, the words lingering in my ears. Not doing anything stupid. Something twisted in my stomach. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that all of it, his words, his touch, the way he looked at me, was real. But deep down, something had already begun to unravel. Jesse came back Sunday evening, loud and sunburned, lugging a duffel bag through the front door like he'd returned from war. I sat on the stairs, sketchpad tucked beneath my arm, pretending I hadn't been listening for the sound of his car all day. "House still standing," he joked, kicking off his sneakers. "Barely," I said, forcing a smile. Kade came downstairs a few minutes later, freshly showered, voice relaxed like nothing had shifted in the days Jesse was gone. He clapped Jesse on the back and fell easily into their usual rhythm. Jokes, shared stories, loud laughter bouncing off the walls. I stood in the kitchen doorway, watching them, watching him. He didn't look at me once. Later that night, I woke to the sound of voices. Muffled, but clear enough to tell they were coming from Jesse's room. I rolled out of bed, crept halfway down the hall, and paused just outside the door. It was open a crack, light slanting across the hardwood. "You've been acting weird, man," Jesse was saying, his tone somewhere between amused and suspicious. "What do you mean?" Kade's voice, calm, measured. I don't know. Hanging out with Noah? Sneaking around? You're not getting too soft on him, are you?" Jesse laughed. Kade chuckled. "Come on. It's just a little fun. He's your brother. He's curious. That's all." My stomach dropped. I pressed my back to the wall, breath caught mid-chest. "You didn't actually do anything, right?" Jesse continued. "Because that would be messed up." "Nah," Kade said. "Nothing serious. Just keeping him entertained." The silence that followed felt like a vacuum, the kind that sucks all the oxygen out of the room. I slipped away before I could hear more. My hands were shaking, the walls warping around me like I'd stepped into another version of the house, one where nothing was safe, where every word spoken behind closed doors left bruises. In my room, I sat on the edge of my bed, eyes stinging. My sketch pad lay open on the floor, one of the unfinished drawings of him staring back at me like an accusation. The curve of his jaw, the softness I thought I'd seen in his expression, it all looked hollow now. The next morning, I waited until Jesse left for the gym. Kade was in the kitchen, leaning against the counter with a bowl of cereal, scrolling through his phone like the world hadn't shifted beneath us. I stepped in slowly. "Can we talk?" He looked up, blinked. "Yeah, sure." I waited for him to put the phone down. When he didn't, I added now. That got his attention. "What's going on?" he asked, setting the bowl aside. "I heard you last night," I said. My voice didn't shake. "Everything you said." To Jesse. His expression froze just for a second, then softened. "No, I didn't mean. You said it was just for fun." I cut in. "That I was curious. That you were keeping me entertained." He stepped forward. "That's not how I meant it." "Then how did you mean it?" He opened his mouth, then closed it. Looked away. "You made me believe something was real," I said, quieter now. "You made me trust you." Kade exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "I didn't think it would go this far. I didn't mean to hurt you." "You didn't mean to get caught," I said. He looked at me then, eyes full of something I couldn't name. Regret, maybe, or guilt, but it didn't matter anymore. "I don't want to do this," I whispered. "I don't want to be something you forget the second you walk out that door." He didn't answer, just stood there, lips parted, hands curled into fists at his sides. I turned and walked away. I didn't cry until I was alone again. Not loud, not broken, just quiet, steady tears that slid down my cheeks like they'd been waiting for permission. I packed my bag that afternoon and texted my mom to say I was heading back to campus early. No explanation, no goodbye. Before I left, I took the sketch pad from under my bed, tore out every drawing of him, and tucked them in the trash. All except one. The first one. The unfinished outline. The one I drew before any of it began. I folded it carefully, slid it into my backpack, and I shut the door behind me. As the bus pulled away from the curb, I stared out the window at the house, shrinking behind trees and power lines. I wasn't sure what hurt more, the kiss, the silence, or the truth. But I knew this. I'd carry the ache, yes, but I'd carry the lesson too. Some stories don't end with a confession or an apology. Some end when you finally decide you deserve better.